The Milwaukee Brewers' first homestand of the 2026 regular season is in the books. And some more updates, changes to the rosters, the Brewers losing their starting first baseman, swinging a minor trade with the San Francisco Giants, and reportedly locking up one of their top infield prospects on a long-term deal. All that and more coming up on this week's edition of the Brewer Fanatic Podcast. Welcome back. Baseball is in full swing, and we have a lot to get to, so we can't afford to waste a whole lot of time here in the early going. But H.C. Purdy asked us off the bat, how are you both doing? I am tired. But tired for good reasons, because there's a lot of baseball stuff going on right now. So I'm happy that the Brewers are going on the road here for a little bit, because it's been a long week and a half for yours truly, bouncing back and forth between being at the ballpark and going on college baseball road trips. So looking forward to a few days to maybe get a full night of sleep here and kind of bounce back a little bit. But the grind never ends. So that's where I'm at. How are you, Spencer?
Yeah, I've had a little more time to get used to just constantly having something going on because of how my work schedule works. So I'm not as tired as you are right now. I think I was more tired than you during a lot of the winter stuff. Now I'm probably a little bit more adjusted to it, but it has been very busy. I haven't been at the ballpark as much, but I've been in the office, obviously. But yeah, it's a very busy time of year, but it is exactly like you said. It's all for good reasons. It's all pretty much all for baseball. And yeah, Brewers got off to a good start. Been enjoying the coaching job. Everything's going well on both sides of that. So yeah, I'm doing quite well right now.
The Brewers, like you said, are doing well in the win column. They're not doing quite as well on the health fronts here in the early going of the season. So we know that Jackson Chourio is going to miss a couple of weeks here on the injured list because of that injury that he sustained in the WBC, or prepping for the WBC, I should say, when he was hit by a pitch in an exhibition game. And then the Brewers finding out a few days later that Andrew Vaughn suffered a broken hamate bone on opening day, the same day that the Brewers placed Jackson Chourio on the injured list. If you remember, Vaughn was pinch run for about midway through the game. In the middle of an inning, he was on base for a batter, and then they pinch ran for him. So basically what happened was, in his first at bat, he got jammed by a pitch, and he kind of felt something off in his hand. He was able to play through it for a couple more innings, and they took him out. And he told us that he didn't really notice there was anything seriously wrong until he woke up in the middle of the night and his hand was black and blue and incredibly swollen. So he got some imaging on it the next day, confirming that he does have a fractured hamate bone in his left hand. So he underwent surgery for that on Monday, and then the timeline from the Brewers is that he's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks with that injury. So obviously it is a blow for the Brewers right now, but I think the larger discussion here is that the ripple effect is probably going to last longer than the 4 to 6 weeks that Andrew Vaughn is out, because we've talked about this plenty. Broken bones or fractured bones in your hand, that is not a good thing for a hitter, especially the hamate bone. That's one that tends to have some lingering effects on a hitter even after he's healthy again and is able to come back and at least be on the field and go back to swinging a bat. This is usually one of the kind of things that can really affect your power, and that is a big part of Andrew Vaughn's game. So not only are the Brewers without Andrew Vaughn for certain on the field for 4 to 6 weeks, even when he comes back, it is a lot trickier now to project that he is going to be the same hitter that he was last year, that it's going to be the same kind of profile. So if you're the Brewers, you probably do need to be thinking about not just filling that first base void in the interim while he's out, but also having some contingency options if he comes back and he's not the same guy for the rest of the season.
Yes, they do. This is the hamate bone is, in terms of like the actual injury, it's not the longest rehab. It's not the longest injury. Just you don't spend the most time on the IL due to the actual injury, but it is one of the worst injuries that a hitter can have, and it does sap the power specifically, like you said, that is something that it can really affect in a pretty major way on the way back. I think back to, and this wasn't a huge power hitter, but Luis Urias, when he broke his that first year back, it there was not much pop. I think it was the next year that he had his pretty big power breakout. But for a guy like Vaughn, who's making a decent amount of money to play first base this year, the Brewers were obviously going to be relying on him, and probably still are to an extent going to be relying on him to provide some of the power that this lineup, as we've talked about, doesn't always possess. He was going to be one of the guys that was supposed to bring some of the power to the lineup. We'll see. I mean, you can't rule out that he's still going to be able to at least bring some of that. My guess would be at least early on after returning, it probably won't be there much. Maybe as the season progresses a little and he gets a little healthier, it starts to feel a little bit better. But it can be a pretty long-lasting injury that has those lingering effects on your ability to impact the ball. So for a guy like Vaughn, he's actually hit for like a pretty high average. He's had an ability to hit for, contact with the Brewers. But the calling card, and again, the biggest reason the Brewers are paying as much as they are for him to play first base this year is that he was supposed to bring some juice in the middle of the order. It's really not an ideal injury for the Brewers or for Vaughn. And it probably is going to affect a good chunk of the season. So obviously Jake Bauers against righties is going to get a very big opportunity here to kind of grab hold of that everyday job against righty pitchers. It'll be interesting to see how they break down some of the lefty starts. We've already seen Bauers in there once or twice against the lefty starter, but I'd imagine they're going to try and avoid that moving forward, at least as much as they can. So whether it's Gary Sanchez, I know Luis Rengifo's taken some ground balls over there. I know Lockridge was taking ground balls over there. Whoever it may be, I think you're going to see some of those guys get an opportunity, and we'll see if any of them take kind of a hold of the position while he's out. And then, like you said, if any of them can be good enough contingency plans if he's just not able to impact the ball like they hope when he returns too.
In the meantime, the Brewers did make an acquisition. So they did recall Jefferson Cairo for a couple of days. That was very clearly, though, just to get another right-handed bat on the roster while they kind of figured out exactly what they were going to do as a little bit more of a long-term move to fill Andrew Vaughn's spot. Not entirely sure that this will be the move that holds for that long, but I would guess this guy's going to get a pretty decent run on the roster. They acquired former outfield prospect Luis Matos from the San Francisco Giants in a minor trade in exchange for cash. Matos, 24 years old, guy who has some prospect pedigree. I'll let you take the lead on this one because from my very preliminary look, there's nothing that jumps out to me about what he's done, neither in the big leagues or even in the minor leagues the last couple of years in terms of, speed, defense, plate discipline. Like nothing looks that great to me, but I know that you maybe have a little more background information on kind of what his reputation was early in his pro career and maybe some of the athleticism that the Brewers might be hoping to tap into here.
Yeah. So first of all, I think we should, you mentioned it a little bit, but he's another guy that the Brewers who have an affinity for these guys who get up to the big leagues early, have made it there quickly. And I think they view it as somebody who they view these types of players as players who still have some untapped potential, who clearly had a bunch of talent to be able to make it to the major leagues as early as they did. I believe Matos came up at 21, if not just before turning 21, originally. So very young. I know they've talked about it with, for some reason, Luis Urias keeps coming up today, but they talked about it with him. It was even part of the discussion with Vaughn was how quickly he moved through the minors and how there were things that, they viewed as potential to keep growing because he never really had as much time to develop and because he had so much talent to move that quickly. But that's, I think, what they're looking at here. They're looking at a guy who moved very quickly, who showed some good things when he was younger. And yeah, like you said, it really hasn't been great in AAA or in MLB the last couple of seasons. Originally, when he was coming up, it was a guy who was a pretty good athlete, nothing spectacular, but a pretty good athlete who was playing a decent outfield defensively. But the main draw was that he wasn't striking out much and he was hitting for some power. And there were projections for more power to be coming down the line. That hasn't necessarily showed up at the big league level. Funny enough, he probably played the best baseball of his career against the Brewers last year in Milwaukee when he hit 2 homers in a series, and he's been very good against the Brewers in his 6 games against them. So maybe the Brewers were just seeing a glimpse of, some really high level version of him and think they could get closer to that a little bit more often just based off of live looks and seeing him in person and seeing some of what he can do. But yeah, it was mostly built around the fact that he had good bat to ball skills. He could impact the ball a decent amount. I don't think he was ever seen as somebody who was going to like draw a lot of walks or make tremendous swing decisions. Now, that has been something the Brewers have kind of been improving with some of the guys that have been coming over to the organization lately. Vaughn being a good example of that, something that improved quite a bit since he's come over. So maybe that's part of the equation. Maybe they believe they can help him with that. I know David Hamilton kind of talked about how that was one of the main points of emphasis when he came over too, is like, hey, you got to get on base, whether it's taking walks or whatever. Like, we got to find ways to get on base. And maybe they believe that simple messaging with Matos can help some of what's going on here. But it's an interesting flyer to take, I think, for cash for a guy who a few years ago was a top 100 prospect, as just getting out of his teenage years and already making it to MLB. Like, I'm definitely not going to complain about taking a flyer on a guy like this. I don't know exactly what their plan is or what they're necessarily thinking they can get out of him, but there is talent here. There is pedigree, and he is probably going to be pretty comfortable because as he kind of talked about already, like, he knows Jackson Chourio. He's known him for a long time. Probably somebody who can kind of easily fit into the clubhouse and get comfortable. And then the only other part of this equation is that the Giants just haven't been very good at developing players at the big league level lately. Obviously, that was a really big part of what made them good in the mid 2010s or the early 2010s into the mid 2010s. But there haven't been many homegrown players that have been all that good for the Giants in a while now. So it could be even a little bit of what we talked about with Vaughn when he got away from the White Sox, maybe just getting into a new environment that's a little bit more conducive to positive development for players could help him move back towards what made him a big prospect at some point. But when I look at it, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I don't think there's a clear-cut path that you can see like there are with some players, or normally pitchers are a little bit easier to point out like what they should do differently. But I don't think there's a clear-cut path to developing him. I think some of it is just betting on talent and pedigree and the fact that he's getting out of an organization that really hasn't been known for helping these types of players for a while now.
And if that doesn't happen, at the very least, he gives you a warm body who can kind of help you
Right.
out while you have Chourio down, Vaughn down. Vaughn being down also means you're probably not going to see Jake Bauers in the outfield. So by extension, bringing in another outfielder makes some sense. It kind of fills a couple of needs there. But yeah, this is kind of what the Brewers do. They bring in these guys where maybe the preliminary purpose is, hey, we just need somebody who can give us some coverage. But usually when they bring in a guy like that, there's always kind of something beneath the surface of, hey, maybe we do catch lightning in a bottle here and we'll see what happens. There was a little bit of that with Vaughn too last year, even when they acquired him. You know, he wasn't not quite the same situation where they needed him on the big league roster right away, even though it ended up kind of working out like that because Rhys Hoskins got hurt pretty quickly after they made that move. But again, a guy who could give them a little more depth at first base. And then if they catch lightning in a bottle there and the physical tools start to come together more and you get more production, great. I think that's kind of what they're going for with this one as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was a pretty big fan of Matos when he was first getting to the big leagues, mostly just because I liked his swing more than anything else, and he was obviously producing at a young age. But yeah, I think that's what they're betting on. And like you said, if it doesn't work out, he kind of keeps the spot warm for Chourio when he returns, and then they cut bait because all they did was give up cash in this deal. There's really not much risk associated with it at all.
In a corresponding move, because the Brewers needed a 40-man spot for Matos, who is out of options, they designated left-hander Sammy Peralta for assignment. He was a waiver claim by the Angels early in the offseason, guy who maybe had a path to kind of being one of those shuttle relievers, but now he's going to be on waivers. We'll see if he ends up getting claimed or if he passes through. And I don't know if he's been outrighted before. I'm going to guess probably not, in which case they could just outright him to AAA if he does clear. If a player's been outrighted before, though, they have the option to elect free agency if they clear waivers. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The last move that we have to discuss, technically not official yet. In fact, it hasn't even been, to my knowledge, confirmed that this has actually happened yet. All we know right now from reports is that the Brewers and Cooper Pratt are nearing a reported extension of 8 years, $51 million, and then two $15 million team options after those 8 guaranteed seasons. So the Brewers trying to lock up one of their top infield prospects. They've spoken very highly of Cooper Pratt, especially the defensive makeup. This is a guy the Brewers like very early on. Think back to when they drafted him out of high school a couple of years ago and the way that they basically kind of molded their draft strategy around Cooper Pratt. Like the picks that they took in earlier rounds, picks that they could sign for well under slot value to make sure that they had a lot of their bonus pool money for Cooper Pratt to coax him out of his college commitment to play pro ball. Now he's nearing the big leagues. He started the year in AAA. He's spent a lot of time, got a lot of action for the Brewers this spring, especially with Joey Ortiz playing in the WBC. Closing in on his big league debut. He's going to, if this gets to the finish line and if the Brewers announce it, they're going to have him locked up for not only the first couple of years of his, the first guaranteed years of his career, or the years of original club control, I should say, but also the chance to tack up to 4 more years onto that as well. Kind of similar time-wise to what they did with Jackson Chourio for how long they locked him up. Obviously a much lower dollar amount because Pratt doesn't quite have the prospect shine that Chourio did, but an interesting move to say the least, especially the timing of it, because right now, as things stand, there's not a clear opportunity for Pratt in the big leagues. He probably does need some AAA at-bats. The glove is big league ready. The bat, I think you would agree with me, Spencer, can probably hold its own in the big leagues right now, or at least be enough to pair with the glove. If he came up right now and had like an 85 to 90 WRC plus with really good defense at shortstop, that's a quality big leaguer. That's probably a 2.5 win, 3 win player, I would guess, over a full season. But probably still some development to happen there. Still a lot of raw power that he can potentially tap into. I can kind of ask you how likely you think that is to actually happen at this point. But an interesting deal, and there's still a lot of questions surrounding this that we just don't know the answer to, and we probably won't know the answer to until this is officially announced. Things like, will the Brewers add him to the 40-man right away? My understanding is they won't because they don't have to. But also, how does this work? The timing of the deal, when does this start, given that he's not on the big league team and his service clock hasn't actually started yet? A lot of information with this deal that has not come out yet, especially because since the report, it's been crickets for a few days now. Cooper Pratt, if I'm remembering correctly, has not played in Nashville since these reports started coming out, but potentially a big move for the Brewers here, trying to lock up a guy that they think is going to be a linchpin in their middle infield for years to come.
Yeah, it's a big move. It's an interesting move. I think it's a relatively low risk extension. Now, we don't know the exact details of how the money's going to be laid out. So if it's kind of a flat rate, which I'm guessing it won't be, I would assume it's probably going to climb as the years go up. But if it is a flat rate, then it actually probably is less risky just because it'll never become too big of a deal. You'd be talking about just over $6 million a year at any point. So no matter what, that's the most you'd have to worry about paying him if things don't work out. Again, I'm assuming it's probably going to climb as he gets into like the actual end of arbitration years and in the beginning of what would be his free agency years. But yeah, there are a lot of questions associated with it. Like, I don't think they're going to move him to the big leagues that much quicker than they already were going to. I actually was wondering, he doesn't have to have a 40-man spot after signing what would technically be a big league deal. Like, I don't know how that works for sure. But I was kind of under the assumption that he would have to have a 40-man spot now that he would technically have a big league contract. But I guess that could have something to do with when it starts also, and we don't necessarily know how that's going to work. But yeah, do you know for sure that he doesn't have to be?
So that's what I've heard. And
Okay.
also just going back to when Churio signed his, he did not get put on the 40 immediately.
Okay.
He didn't get put on the 40, and he got put on the 40 because he made the opening day roster.
Sure.
But he signed the contract before that, and the Brewers didn't need to make a roster move at that point.
Okay.
So I believe it's that he doesn't need to be added to the. I know MLB trade rumors said that he does. So
Okay.
conflicting information on that, I guess, but I don't think he needs to be right now,
Okay.
which to me
Yeah.
would make more sense because that kind of hurts the Brewers' flexibility in the short term because it's costing you a 40 spot. And if you don't intend for him to make the big leagues right now, it's also potentially costing you an option year on Cooper
Yep.
Pratt as well. If he has to join the 40 man and then he's in AAA for 3 more months, that costs you his first option year right off the bat. So it's interesting. Not something that happens a lot. That's why we don't really know all the details on how exactly this works. But we'll get that information, I'm sure, once the Brewers actually confirm the deal and announce it, and there's more media availability to kind of ask some of these questions. Uncle Ron asked something that you touched on, Spencer. Did any official figures come out for Pratt's contract year by year? Saw the total number was a tick under 51 million, but haven't seen any details besides that. So, like you said, I would guess that this is backloaded a little bit, especially if he's not going to be in the big leagues right away. I'm not quite sure why they would start on a flat rate for a guy getting paid like a big leaguer if he's not going to be in the big leagues right away. I don't know if that actually matters that much to them with how they space the money out, but knowing what their financial outlook is as well for the next few years, like I think it also makes sense to be more backloaded because you're going to have Yelich's deal coming off the books in a little bit. You're going to be presumably losing William Contreras, Bryce Terang, some of these guys, Sal Frelick, some of these guys who are going to start getting more expensive in ARB, and then they'll be gone within 3-4 years here. Backloaded makes the most sense to me, just kind of reading between the lines and looking at what their situation is. But we don't know what the numbers are. We'll find out with time.
Yeah, and if they truly do believe in Pratt, which they obviously do if they're making this move, like they're going to feel comfortable with the backloaded contract and they're going to believe that he's going to be worth that money when they get there, or they wouldn't have made this offer and they wouldn't have reportedly, or they wouldn't be close to agreeing on this extension at the moment if they weren't comfortable with it. So it is just, I don't know that we've really seen this, like an in-season pre-debut contract extension for a major leaguer and then no immediate promotion. I can't think of a time I don't think there really is one. I think this is the first one that's happened. There have been guys who have been up for like 2 days and then got their extension, and it sounds like Connor Griffin is pretty much agreed on an extension, and now he's coming up to the big leagues for the Pirates right now. But I don't know that there's an example of this, so it'll be really interesting to see how the details do play out and how they look when they actually do come out. But yeah, right now we don't have those details. And just to circle back to a couple other things you had mentioned, like the power is going to be a really interesting part of the equation. Now, I don't know that it's going to be super necessary for him to be valuable. Like you said, I think right now he could hold his own. He could probably be in that 85, maybe 90 WRC plus range. And then the defense would carry the profile, and it would kind of be like Bryce Terang was before his power breakout last year. Like, that's kind of how we viewed Terang. And it's funny, like, if the Brewers had made this extension with Terang early in his career, it would have been similar. We would have all been saying, like, well, if the power comes around, then it could look really good. Otherwise, it'll probably be okay value and he'll be fine, but it's not going to be some crazy steal. So I don't know if the Brewers maybe feel a little more comfortable with the fact that they've seen Terang have this power breakout a little bit later after he's actually been in the big leagues and he's had some experience and he's gotten a little bit stronger. He's had a little bit more time to mature into just, his mid-20s now almost. And they view that as like a path for Pratt to take and say, hey, get to the big leagues, kind of find your footing. And then we start to work on some of the bat speed stuff. We start to work on some of the specifically training to get some of the in-game power. But even like back in the minors, Terang was showing a little bit more raw power than Pratt is. Like, Pratt's raw power is not very big, even despite his size. Like, Terang took a while to get to it in games, and it took some approach changes, and it took a little bit more of like you even talked about it before he had the breakout. Like, you saw it in BP for a while. He was crushing baseballs. That's not really the case with Pratt. Now, he can hit homers in BP. He's a professional baseball player capable of hitting home runs in BP, but it's not the same level of just raw ability. So that's what's going to be interesting to me. Can he add some of the bat speed? I think that's really going to be the main piece to him being able to add that power. But I like the swing. He hits a ton of line drives. I think that's going to lend itself to being able to be that okay hitter and letting the defense carry it if the power never comes along. He had good strikeout and good walk numbers in AA last year. He does chase a decent amount right now. He has tremendous bat to ball skills, so he can get the bat to the ball even when he's going out of the zone. But I do wonder if the walk numbers will kind of, I think they're going to go down a little bit in AAA, and they'll probably be even a little bit lower when he does get to MLB, unless he can clean up some of the chase. But I mean, there's a lot to like here. And the other part of the equation is not just the player, but the Brewers organization loves Cooper Pratt, the person. They believe in his level of maturity. They love him as a teammate. I have, ever since he got into pro ball, like, the few things I hear from people in the minor leagues is just them glowing about how much they love Cooper Pratt and how hard he works, how good of a teammate he is. Adam McKelvey tweeted out that he was focused on learning Spanish this whole spring, trying to be able to communicate better with some of the Spanish speaking teammates that he has, just so that he can kind of get to know them better and do things like that. They probably view him as a future leader of the team, along with all of the baseball skills. So that probably makes them more confident and more willing to go out and guarantee him this money, because they're that confident in the person and the type of work ethic they're going to get. And they know that if it doesn't work out, it's not going to be because he got lazy after getting paid, or he didn't really care that much. Like, they're very confident that all of that's going to be there. And if the power does come, it's going to be a great deal. And if it doesn't, they're still going to feel pretty comfortable with what they're paying him.
The comparison to Terang's development is interesting because it kind of leads into the next few questions that we got about this. Mason asked a threefold question. First of all, what does the Pratt deal mean for Made or Terang extensions? I don't think it changes anything for Made, but the boat on extending Terang passed a while ago. That's not happening.
That's where I'm at too. I think they're still going to try to extend Made. I think there's a pretty good chance they do this offseason, if I were to guess. This upcoming offseason, I should say. I think they're going to get something done with him, probably closer to what the Connor Griffin numbers are right now. I don't know if he'll quite reach that same level, but I think it'll be much closer to that than what Cooper Pratt is reportedly getting. But I think they'll get something done there. I agree on Terang. We can kind of move to the third part of this question on here, because he asked if 5 years, $120 million would be doable for Bryce Terang, and he comped it to Nico Horner getting 6 years, 141 million. I saw this a lot on social media. I think we should clarify here that, first of all, Bryce Terang has, including this season, he has 4 years of team control left. So he has this season, and then he still has 3 years of arbitration after that for the Brewers. So he is a 5-year extension, and I'm assuming that would start this year, would only buy out 1 year of free agency. So if it started the next year, then it would buy out 2, and maybe that looks a little bit more in line with what I would think. But if we're only buying out 1 year of free agency, I would imagine that 1 year, if you're kind of doing the math on how arbitration works, would only wind up being like 50 to 60 million that you'd be paying, essentially, not in real money because they changed the way they do it, but like in terms of how much he's going to make in arbitration versus that 1 year of free agency, I think that'd be pretty close to what it is. So Nico Horner was in his final season of club control. He was going to be a free agent this offseason. So this is a true free agent contract, basically, with it starting. Actually, I don't know if is it 6 years from next year, or was it including this year?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to check.
Yeah, we can look into it. But either way, I get why everyone's comparing them because they are comparable players. I would take Bryce Terang over Nico Horner, especially with the power output really moving up the totem pole the way it has the last year. But I get why people are comparing them, but it's a very, very different situation. So I think Bryce Terang would take 5 years, 120 million if it started this year, because he would be getting a really big payday for the 1 year of free agency that it would be buying out. I don't think they're going to buy out arbitration years at a really high amount just to get him for another year or two. I think you're right, Jack. I think the ship has kind of sailed on that. I think they needed to get something done before the breakout happened. And we've talked about that a number of times. Like it seems pretty unlikely to get done now. I had heard a couple times like they are interested in it. They're not completely ruling it out. The Brewers are going to explore it with him. But my guess would be, from Terang's point of view, the offers probably aren't going to make a ton of sense. And from the Brewers' point of view, what Terang is going to demand will be what he's worth, most likely, but it probably won't fit with what they think makes sense going forward. And considering they have Pratt, they have Madej, they have a bunch of other interesting young infielders coming up, and they still have 3 years and 155 games worth of Bryce Terang if they want to have him that entire time. I think it's just in a weird spot where you probably don't see anything get done unless Terang is willing to take a very team-friendly deal compared to what his true value is.
Yeah, for an organization like the Brewers, the only way they're going to get the extensions done, the one exception being Christian Yelich, who established himself as a franchise player, and I think that's just as much what that deal was about as anything else. And also the fact that he took less money than he was on track to make with the kind of production he was giving them. That was a big part of it as well, just because he wanted to remain in Milwaukee. But barring that exception, the Brewers are only going to sign extensions like this before guys fully establish themselves or blossom into what they think that they're going to turn into. It's what they did with Freddie Peralta. It's what they did with Aaron Ashby. It's what they did with Churio. It's what they're doing with Pratt here. That's going to be how it works. And Terang is not a candidate for that because we probably haven't hit the full breakout yet. That's probably what I would imagine this year is going to end up being, because the power didn't really translate into games until the second half of last year. And now with the full season of that, this is probably going to be like his capital B breakout season where like he really blossoms into everything he can be. But because that already started last year, I think that ship is like, you're past that point of signing Bryce Terang to a relatively modest extension before he really starts to tap into his potential. That's already happening now. So, like I said, the ship has sailed. And at that point, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Brewers to do that kind of stuff, I don't think. I think it makes more sense for them to be investing in developing the next Bryce Terang as opposed to extending the one that they have now for what, like you said, is probably going to be a market value contract. I would guess that's what he wants, and that's what that's what he'll deserve if he
Mhm.
continues to play at the rate that he's been playing at. So, yeah, I don't think it happens. I think you're just going to see more of what the Brewers are doing right now, and this is kind of becoming the trend throughout baseball because it works for teams. If the player really reaches his potential, it becomes a very team friendly deal. There's also no hostility between the team and the player because they agreed on this deal early on. There's no, squabbles over arbitration salaries or anything like that. So it does, I think, end up working for both sides. These guys get life changing money as well when they're in their early 20s or sometimes younger. This is kind of the norm. If the Brewers are going to spend more money and sign extensions, this is going to be where they do it. It's not going to be on a player like where Bryce Terang is now.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said with Yelich, Braun and Yelich are kind of the two guys who they won MVPs. They were willing to take probably less than they were going to get on the open market, and they thought they needed to keep those two around. Other than that, I don't think you'll see guys that are this late into their contracts getting extensions unless, like I said, it's some deal that frankly doesn't make much sense for them, and it just makes a ton of sense for the Brewers. And odds are there's not many agents that are going to even let a player sign a deal like that.
Let's talk about some of the baseball this week. So the Brewers, they swept the White Sox to open the year. Then they took 2 of 3 from the Tampa Bay Rays, starting 5-1 on the season. Spencer, we'll talk about this as we go through a little bit. Probably didn't quite play like a 5-1 team, but still played very good baseball and a solid start to the season, capitalizing on some mistakes made by, particularly in the first series, a poor quality opponent. And then in the second series, a team that's probably better than they showed in that series, but did not really play clean baseball either. So, start with the White Sox series. We already recapped opening day last week, so we'll start with game 2. Brewers won this one by a final of 6-1. Chad Patrick got the ball in this one. Only run that he allowed was a solo shot by Munetaka Murakami, who hit 3 home runs in the series. And now the entire baseball world is wondering, did the industry miss on a guy who has giant holes in his swing? I'm still going to say probably not. But that's beside the point. Patrick, 4 1/3 for him. The quick hook again, right off the bat. And this is, to me, we're not going to go through every detail of these games, but this is one of the big takeaways that I had. Are the Brewers going to continue to manage Chad Patrick the way that they did last year as a starter, which I think at the time was the right way to play it? He was a guy who was basically getting away only on fastballs, didn't have a clear breaking ball, had some very big platoon splits because of that, had very big third time through the order splits because of that. They were doing things absolutely the correct way by getting him out of there that third time through, regardless of where the pitch count was at, regardless of what the line looked like. Now, they made a couple exceptions if like the bullpen was in rougher shape and they just needed a little bit more length from the starter. But by and large, when they had a rested enough bullpen, Pat Murphy had a very quick hook with him, which I think he should have. Did it again in this one. I still think this is a different Chad Patrick, though, especially now that he's got that slurve or that curveball, which tunnels really, really well with the cutter. Got a ton of chases last year. I think was arguably just as responsible for his playoff dominance as the velo bump, because he did throw a lot of curveballs when he was pitching out of the bullpen in the playoffs, even as he was also throwing, 97 with his more traditional fastballs. Did not throw it much in game 1, or his first start of the season, I should say. I think Contreras called maybe 3 of them. It was like 3 to 5 the entire game, and the first 2 got really bad chases right away. Didn't use it the rest of the game. I don't think he really needed it either, based on, kind of how he performed. But to me, that pitch just, I truly believe that's the answer to a lot of the shortcomings in his game. And if the Brewers don't allow him to throw that more and then pull him early because they are citing these concerns about platoon splits and third time through, and to me, that's a missed opportunity to let him show that he can do a little more because I truly believe that now that he's got this pitch, there's more in there. And I'm very high on Chad Patrick last year, which is funny because we watched his first few starts last year, and it was at this time last year that we were saying, yeah, but capable back of the rotation starter, but probably not as good as these early results. But he got better throughout the year, and now here we are a year later, and I'm very much on the Chad Patrick breakout train this year as a starting pitcher. But for that to happen, the Brewers, I think, need to actually give him the chance to apply the adjustments and the changes that he's added to alleviate those concerns. And that did not happen in this first start.
Yeah, but if they let him go 5 or 6, then how's Aaron Ashby going to throw 120 innings this year, Jackie? No, I'm with you completely. We were on the same page last year when we talked about it. Like it was fine. He was a solid major league caliber pitcher when he was first making his starts, but the ERA was a lot shinier than the actual process-based stuff and peripherals were looking like. But that breaking ball, the moment we saw it when he came back from AAA last year, it was like, oh, that could change some things. And he kind of figured it out a little bit more as he threw it more, which isn't shocking. And that's a real pitch now. And that's a pitch that can help with lefties. It can help with showing, like, if you're not going to use a lot early in games, like they didn't in this start, then it could be something that helps you get through an order the third time as you show it more. Like that could be something like I would buy that type of logic of like, hey, he's doing well without it right now. We don't need it right now. But now that we're third time through, now we start to show it more. Now we start to use it more. Like I could buy that logic, but then you have to let him go a third time through and let him take that opportunity to try and use the rest of his repertoire to go through the order again. And especially against a team like the White Sox, I'd really like to see him get that opportunity like 9 times out of 10. I think that's what you should be doing in that type of situation. So it's one way to save the bullpen a little bit. He's capable of doing it now. And I think that's the next step for him is just he has to get used to doing that too. And again, when you're playing a team like the White Sox and there's some talent over there, don't get me wrong, but like that's a bad baseball team. And this is a chance to like, first time out, let's see if he can get through 5, get through 6, give him that opportunity and see how he's feeling and see how he does when he has more up downs and how he's feeling the next day after going multiple innings further than he normally did last year. And I think it's a missed opportunity, not only moving forward if they don't do it, but I think it was already a missed opportunity to kind of give him that chance to do it it's a big league game. It's a big league start. The lead wasn't huge when they took him out, but it wasn't all that small. I think it was a missed opportunity right away to get him that chance, to give him that opportunity to do that and to see how it all went with a little bit of wiggle room to work with too. I definitely don't like the pull for him there. But I'm hoping they'll kind of adjust the plan as they move forward because you're absolutely right. He does not need to be handled the same way he was most of last year. And again, that was correct. They were right to do that last year. Like they were 100% correct to do that. But it's a different Chad Patrick now, and you got to let him try and work through what he's going to be doing. If he's going to be a true starter in the rotation, he needs to get the opportunity to try and go 5 or 6 innings 3 times through an order once in a while, especially if things are going well. So we'll see if it's something that changes moving forward, but I hope it does, and I think it should.
Couple other notes from this one. Bryce Terang had himself a nice day at the plate, 3 for 5 with a couple of doubles. Brandon Lockridge, Joey Ortiz adding RBI singles. Lockridge and Ortiz also linking up on the play of the game. Relay to cut down a run at home plate. There was a base hit toward the line in left field. Lockridge was shaded over a little bit, so it was hit away from him. Misplayed the ball. Chicago decided to send the runner, Colson Montgomery, around third. Lockridge recovers, fires it to Ortiz. Ortiz throwing a perfect strike to William Contreras. Not just a perfect strike, but putting the ball exactly where it needed to be for a good tag, which I think is the really underrated part of this play. Like, these plays are not always like traditional good throw of, oh, you hit the catcher in the chest, like great throw. No, you got to put that ball where the play is actually going to be. You're not throwing necessarily to the catcher. You're throwing, like, trying to throw to the play. And Ortiz did that perfectly on this one. They cut him down easily. Literally, like, the throw went right to where Montgomery was sliding. Like, it was that perfect. But this is a play that really stood out to Pat Murphy, who raved post game after this play about Ortiz's ability to redirect the baseball. And that was something that he really just harped on, saying that's not an easy thing to do, whether it's a play like this, getting a throw from the outfield and then redirecting it toward home plate, whether it's the play that he would actually end up making the next day where he initiated a double play. He slid in the hole between short and third, and from his knees, as he was still sliding toward third, fired a perfect throw to Bryce Terang to initiate a double play. Uh, but those are the kind of things that really stand out to Joey Ortiz, or stand out to the Brewers about Joey Ortiz. After this play, I talked to Murphy about it more. I talked to Matt Erickson about it. I wrote a story that went up on Thursday morning just about this is really why the Brewers love his defense so much. We've talked a lot about how the metrics are kind of mixed on him, and ironically, he's already at -1 DRS this year. So if you needed any more sign that we were back and Brewers baseball was back, DRS is already not liking Joey Ortiz as he's on the highlight reels. But after writing this story, I do think part of that is a little more like it seems like the thing that he is best at is the one thing that DRS does not seem to account for. And I do still think it's probably the best infield metric we have for evaluating defense. But the one thing that the Brewers like the most is just his body control. And we've touched on it a little bit, but just to hear more people say it kind of made the picture a little clearer. The way that he controls his body, the way that he can kind of start and stop, the way that he can adjust to things, just mastery of like knowing how he moves, knowing where he is on the field. That's how you get a lot of these plays where, like, that sliding play, that's how you get a lot of these plays where, like, it just seems like a bad hop never eats him up. He's just able to adjust to that and work with the ball no matter what it's doing. If it's a bad hop, if it's funny spin, like, he just has such good coordination of his body, even if he's not their most explosive mover. And that's kind of where you get what we've talked about before, where, like, it doesn't really look fast or explosive, but it looks really, really smooth and really, really fluid. So he's not always covering the most ground, but this was actually the most interesting thing to hear Matt Erickson say. The Brewers prefer to have Joey Ortiz at shortstop over Bryce Terang because they actually value the body control and the smoothness more than they value the explosiveness at shortstop, which was something that I had never really thought of before. I mean, we talked about it a couple months ago about how, based on how those guys move and the explosiveness and the range, like, maybe Terang could be a better shortstop than Joey Ortiz. But it seems like the Brewers, Matt Erickson at least, doesn't quite see it that way. He said, like, he actually believes that what Bryce is good at plays best at second base, especially he talked about, like, if you have a right-handed batter in the box holding a runner, having the guy at second base needing to be able to cover more ground because he's holding the runner and then has to get back in position and potentially make a play. He also talked about how, like, at shortstop, you do not have time to bobble the baseball. So you need the guy who is the most sure-handed. And if there is one knock to make against Bryce Terang, it is that he fumbles the baseball sometimes, but he's usually able to recover. He wouldn't have that same amount of time at shortstop. Ortiz, you basically never see him fumble the ball. If a play is not made, it's just because he didn't get there. But anything that he is able to get to, basically a vacuum cleaner over there. So it's just really interesting to hear, like, the way that the Brewers kind of got to that decision. And Terang's shoulder injury obviously cemented it. But to kind of hear why Ortiz has stayed over there and why they haven't revisited Terang at shortstop and why they've kept it the way they have and kind of what they value from each position and what they value about Ortiz. Very interesting to hear, I think. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was one of my favorite articles. Like I've talked about, I love when we can get nerdy about infield stuff. And yeah, when we've talked about Ortiz, we've kind of talked about how he really is great at those like off platform throws, those types of plays where you're just in an uncomfortable position and you can still make a play. And it's when we highlight him most of the time, it's because he made a play like that where he makes a barehanded play and can throw it from some just ridiculous angle. And that was even the case at third base. That was often one of the things you would notice first about him on a play was one of his first series with the Brewers against the Twins. I just remember the barehanded play he made against, I think it was Manuel Margot, with the bases loaded, and it got overturned on replay, but it was just a ridiculous play that I thought he had no chance of making. But he barehanded it and made this throw from just a really uncomfortable position and gotten out. And I think of other times he's done that at shortstop now. And like you said on the relay, that throw, Contreras literally caught the ball and just didn't move. And Montgomery was sliding right into his glove. Like that is a perfect throw from decently far into the outfield grass. And it was quick. I mean, he had his body turned when he caught it. It was a perfect, just very quick transfer. Everything about it was really, really good. But it does make sense. I mean, especially if that is what they value at short, and a lot of what you just talked about makes a lot of sense. Like you don't have time for the bobble at shortstop. You do need to have the ability to make throws that are from different positions than you do at even second base. Like going up the middle at second can be uncomfortable at times, but I would still say almost anything where you're ranging deep into either hole at short is going to be an even more uncomfortable throw. At second, you don't very often have to spin unless you're going like into right field to make a play. And often then you're only going to be throwing the ball like 30, 40 feet. So like it makes a lot of sense. Now, as we've talked about, obviously the best case scenario would be someone who can do all of it and have, great range and do all of this stuff. But if they value this more highly, then it makes perfect sense why he's at short, because he is better than Bryce Terang at the things that they're describing there. Like that, I don't think that's really even debatable. But Terang obviously has the step and the advantage in terms of the range. And like you said, the one thing that he might struggle with at times is that it's not always a clean transfer. It's not always the cleanest receiving the ground ball in, but at second, you get that extra half a second to make the play. And he's going to make the play when he gets that extra time. But yeah, no, I loved that article. That was one of my favorite to read of yours, because it's just exactly the type of stuff that we don't ever hear about, but it gave a really good glimpse behind the scenes of like what they're looking for at each spot, why they are sticking with Ortiz there. It probably gave, secondhand, it probably gave a little bit of a glimpse as to why Cooper Pratt is getting this type of deal. I would imagine they're very, very confident that he's good at all of these things that we're discussing. And considering what I've seen of him, I think he's got pretty good range, kind of in like the JJ Hardy mold, where you wouldn't expect it when you're watching him, and then you realize he's just getting to a lot of stuff that a lot of people aren't getting to. But when you do watch him, most of what he's really good at is just clean baseball on the routine stuff, but also being able to throw on the move for a guy his size, especially. Like it's really impressive. So I think you could kind of tie that into why they're so comfortable with the extension for Pratt too. But yeah, that type of stuff is just so up my alley. I love pitching stuff, but infield defense, we just never get anything on. So whenever we get some inside baseball on that type of stuff, that's my favorite for sure.
My evolution from pitching nerd to infield defense nerd continues. I'm glad that Spencer liked the story. That's my barometer of, did I write a good enough story? How does Spencer feel about it?
Well, you'd write a lot of really good stories if that's how it is. So
thank you, buddy. Let's talk about game 3 here. Milwaukee 9, the White Sox 7. Brandon Sproat pitched in this one. It's about all we need to say.
Yes, he did.
Did not go well. We're not going to run through the specifics. Basically what it was he was just, nothing was locked in this start. Walked 4. missed over the plate. But basically, he went from in the first couple innings, like just yanking everything, to the last few innings missing everything right down the middle. So almost kind of an over adjustment of, it was two different kinds of non-competitive pitches is what we had during this start. And the outcome was 3 innings and 7 earned runs allowed. That's about all we need to say. He's going to be fine. Just not a good first outing for him. And they'll have to flush it and move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get to watch this one. I went back and kind of did the 10-second skip through most of the start on MLB TV just to see, and looked at some of like the charts. And like you said, I mean, it was either a bad miss or it was floating right over the middle. Command has never really been a huge concern for Sprout. In fact, most of the time it's graded out as above average from like the scouting, just from Fangraphs and Baseball America and everything else. It's graded out as like a 55 usually. So I'm not really concerned about it. I don't think it's going to be a big issue, but first start, new team, Sunday with a pretty big crowd. I'd imagine there were some nerves involved, and it just kind of got away from him for a little bit. And yeah, I'm not super concerned about it. The stuff is there. The command's not a real big long-term concern for me. So I think we will see a much better version of Sprout next time out.
Brewers offense able to pick him up a little bit with a big 8th inning, loading the bases on some free bases. Bryce Terang coming through with an RBI single. Luis Rengifo with a 2-run single as well, with the bases loaded again. And then Christian Yelich coming off the bench, pinch hitting for Gary Sanchez, hitting a 3-run home run, giving the Brewers that 9-7 lead to complete the sweep. Note from the bullpen in this series, because they did some pretty good damage control after Sprout came out. Mainly Grant Anderson, Jared Koenig, Jake Woodford looked pretty good in his couple of innings that he got before that comeback. 14 2/3 for the bullpen in the White Sox series, and only 1 run allowed, and that was the home run that Woodford allowed on opening day. 7 hits, 6 walks, 25 strikeouts, and once again, they're facing a very bad offense here. Obviously part of the equation, but good work by couple of the B guys, especially to keep the Brewers in this one before that comeback.
Yes, I'm hopeful that seeing some of these guys performing, and you know, there's a lot of talent in the bullpen right now. Like, the B guys are pretty talented relievers, but I'm hopeful that seeing some of this will help as the season progresses if these guys are still performing, and maybe we'll see them a little bit more often in the games where the Brewers might trail by a couple runs or even lead by 3 or 4 in the middle innings, and we don't have to go to Aaron Ashby every time, or we don't have to go to Uribe or McGill at the end of a 4-run game when they've pitched 3 times in the last 5 days. But we'll see. We will see how that plays out. But it was good to see it. Obviously, it does hopefully give a bit of a vote of confidence for some of these guys. And also, it's good to see it from like the Jared Koenig perspective. We haven't seen quite the high level velo that we had seen at times from Koenig so far this year, but it's definitely been up from where it was when we were seeing a lot of 90. I've seen more like 93, 94. Now, maybe I'm off on that. I haven't seen every outing that he's had, but when I've seen him, it's been more 93, 94, which I think he can be fine there. I'd still obviously like to see it up a little bit more as the season progresses, and maybe see him reach back like he has in the past randomly for, Jared Koenig just hit 99 out of nowhere, which we would always love to see once in a while. But I do think it's at least more playable than what we were seeing early in spring. So that's been good to see. And especially Grant Anderson, I was happy to see. And he had at least one more in the Tampa series as well. But it's good to see him have a good start, because I will maintain I don't understand why everyone disliked Grant Anderson last year so much. Every time he would come in and give up 1 run over the course of, his last 5 appearances, everyone just had to blow up on Grant Anderson. Grant Anderson's a really solid reliever. And I'm glad he's off to a good start, because I think he's going to give the Brewers a lot of really quality innings again this year.
Let's go to the Rays series. The Brewers taking 2 out of 3 from Tampa Bay to wrap up their first homestand of the 2026 regular season. Kyle Harrison started game 1, which Tampa Bay would end up winning 3-2. Harrison, the first batter he faced was Yandy Diaz, who got a hanging changeup, hit a leadoff home run. After that, he locked it in extremely well. 39% whiff rate on the four-seam fastball. So another guy that I wrote a story on leading into his debut, talked to Kyle Harrison, talked to Chris Hook about where he's at, some of the work that they've done with him. Shocking, the Brewers are very, very high on a guy's fastball. But really, Chris Hook had a lot of things to say about just how unique of a profile Kyle Harrison is. Left-handed pitcher with his kind of build who throws from a lower slot, little cross body. Was not really expecting this. He made the comp to like Josh Hader's fastball, which is no small praise coming from the pitching coach who was formerly Josh Hader's pitching coach. To see shades of that with the angles and kind of the way it plays up and the deception and just the upshoot nature of it. Obviously not as extreme as Hader's. I think you're still talking about probably 6-inch difference in induced vertical break. But they see shades of it playing similarly, especially at the top of the zone. And we saw it in this start, a 39% whiff rate on his four-seam fastball, which he threw 60% of the time. And, Hook said that they've been doing some work on his delivery, changing some little things, getting him more on time, trying to improve the execution a little bit. But I still don't know that people fully realize just how much of the Brewers pitching development lab, if you want to call it that, is basically letting guys be themselves and do what they do best. And this one was also a fun one for me to write because, again, I think that over the years, there's just been so many myths that have popped up surrounding the pitching lab, whether it's, the Brewers redesign all these pitches and blah, 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 blah. Or another one is, oh, they want everybody to add a cutter. You come to the Brewers, you're going to throw a cutter. Kyle Harrison added a cutter with the Red Sox last year. And when he got to Milwaukee, they immediately told him, don't throw it. They don't want him throwing the cutter right now. So they don't actually just have this cookie cutter. Here's the Brewers' way of doing things. I think they've just so happened to bring in a lot of similar, cheaper back of the rotation profiles. But Kyle Harrison is a lot different than a lot of the guys that they've been working with the past few years, and they're treating him differently as well. So they're working to his strengths, which is throwing that really deceptive, whiffy four-seamer a lot. They're working on the breaking ball a little bit. They got rid of the cutter in part because he's different than a lot of these cutter throwing guys that they've brought in. Most of these guys who throw the 3 fastball variants for the Brewers, they're these guys who throw from this 35 to 45-ish degree arm slot. They cut the ball very slightly, they cut their natural fastballs very slightly, which means that usually if you're throwing a four-seamer with, kind of in that usually 80 to 85 spin efficiency or maybe 75 to 85 spin efficiency. That means you're cutting the ball ever so slightly at release on the outside of the ball a little bit or toward the outside of the ball. Usually when you do that from that kind of slot, your four-seamer is going to have some carry but not a lot and very little run. Your sinker is going to have not a ton of depth, but it's not going to carry and it's going to have more run. And then you're going to be able to throw a cutter that's not great. Basically, you can throw 3 perfectly mediocre fastball variants if that's what your arm does and that's what your arm slot is. Kyle Harrison is not like those guys. Kyle Harrison has a lower slot and he stays almost perfectly behind the baseball when he throws his fastballs. So again, you can measure that with spin efficiency. On Kyle Harrison's fastball, his spin efficiency is 99, not 75 to 85. It's 99. So instead of slightly cutting that ball a little bit toward the outside, he is perfectly behind that thing. And that's why his four-seamer not only has a slight bit of carry, but it also has a lot of run to it as well, just because he's so behind it. So it's such a it's a unique shape. It's not like a more what's become a more traditional four-seamer in modern baseball. It's a different shape from a different slot. That's why it's so deceptive, but that's also why it's tricky for him to throw a cutter. He's not like these other guys where you can just say, oh, cutter grip, offset fastball, try to get around it just a little more, cutter. Like, you can't do that with him. And that's kind of what he and Chris Hook talked about. Like, the Red Sox had him try this. They wanted it to be like another in zone fastball that he could throw. And he said, well, number one, I couldn't get it to do what it was supposed to do. Basically, what would happen is he would either, because like his natural mechanics and the way his wrist works and all that stuff is just, and his arm slot is just not very compatible with throwing a cutter. Either he would release it too early and it would back up and it wouldn't really cut, or he would stay on it too long and he'd release it too late and it would just turn into a worse slider basically, and it wouldn't have, any carry because he came too far around it because he was hanging onto it for so long from that low slot, and it would not have like the fastball lift to it. It would just be a worse slider. So, the Brewers saw that right away and said, we're not going to use this. So he didn't throw any in any of his spring training games. Both Harrison and Hook said that in a perfect world, they want to try to bring it back a little bit later after they've cleaned some other stuff up, and maybe they can try a different version of it that might work a little better with how his body works. Because like Robert Gasser, who is kind of similar, like he does throw a cutter. Now he doesn't get behind the ball like Harrison does, so it's definitely a different comparison, but that's probably like the closest blueprint if you're going to try something similar. But this to me was just such a good example of like, there's not really a Brewers way to how they develop pitching. It's very much, they understand what different profiles are capable of, and they are going to do what is best for that profile. A lot of times just by letting them be themselves and then cleaning up a couple of smaller things. And if they do add a pitch, it's because they know that profile can add that pitch. But in Kyle Harrison's case, he basically has all of the pitches that his profile can throw. That his slot, his wrist, the way he moves, he has all the pitches that he can throw. Now, they do, like I said, if they get him moving even better, they think they can bring the cutter back. But this is just like an important thing. Like if people really want to know how the pitching lab works, this is a very good case study.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to say it is that they maximize what pitchers are comfortable with and what their bodies allow them to do. And then they work around that and they just build off of that and they go from there. And like you said, that type of spin efficiency from his slot is how he's creating a shape that just isn't normal. I saw a plot from somebody on Twitter that was basically comparing every lefty fastball in baseball. And he was offset from all but like one person. I don't think the other person was labeled. I don't know who he was, but it's a shape that's just very different from pretty much everyone else that throws a fastball from the left side. And that's why he gets this really high level of whiff against it. And yeah, in terms of the cutter, more than anything, he's clearly a natural pronator, and he's not super comfortable to supination part of the equation. And we've talked about it before, but pronation is more like, if you think about how people would historically throw a changeup trying to get on the inside of the ball, super extreme example is Devin Williams and his ability to just completely get on the inside of the ball, which is obviously he's an outlier. And then supinating is how you throw a breaking ball. It's getting on the outside of the ball, curveball, slider, that type of stuff is how you think of that. And to throw a good cutter, usually, like you said, those guys who throw good cutters and then also have the 3 fastball variation for the Brewers, their natural inclination is to get on the outside of the ball, and that's the way their body moves. That's the way their hand and their wrist want to move on the ball. And Kyle Harrison doesn't have that, so they're not going to force him into this movement pattern that he's not comfortable with, that isn't going to work super well, isn't going to be consistent for him. And yeah, I think that's a really good overarching point. It's not just we bring in these guys and this is what we do. We teach them a cutter. We do this with their fastballs. We do this with, like, no, it's, we bring in a player, we figure out what they're good at, we figure out how to maximize that, we build around that. And that's really the general idea of the pitching lab, which again is not actually a lab. It's really just the people that the Brewers have working with the pitchers. And really it's a partnership between the pitchers and the people who are, Chris Hook, Jim Henderson, the guys who are on the field with them, working with them at the big league level, but also in the minor leagues as well, because it goes through the entire organization. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed that part of that article, especially because I do think you're right. Like that is, and I feel partially responsible for this because I made that stupid pitching lab go burr meme like 3 years ago for Yorman Galindez, who is back, by the way. He's healthy again. I'm very excited to watch him with the Timber Rattlers. But I made that stupid meme and it's all over the place all the time. And now I hate that meme. I can't stand that meme because it's simplifying and it's kind of taking away some of the actual work that's going on between the pitchers and the coaching staff and everyone else. Like, it's just this simple, hey, we just do this and now we fixed them. Like, if it was really that simple, every team in baseball would be doing this by now, just like they built pitching labs, the real version of the pitching labs, after they saw the Brewers' success with it. If it was as simple as, hey, we just do this, we had a cutter, we make him a 3 fastball guy, and now we fixed all our pitchers, like, that's what every team would be doing with all their pitchers, because that's all it takes, right? But it's not that simple, and they don't do things that way. And to be honest, from what we've heard, based on the couple guys who've come from the Red Sox, it kind of sounds like they are doing things that way. Like, just based on how we've heard the people who came over from them, like, it kind of does sound like they're just kind of forcing them into, like, well, this is what we want you to do. We want you to throw 3 different versions of your fastball and throw your pitches like this, and we're going to force you into it. And if it works, great. If not, whatever, we'll just move on. And I think it's a much better plan to maximize what each guy is capable of. And that's how you find diamonds in the rough. That's how you get a breakout from a Quinn Priester. That's how you get a breakout potentially from a guy like Harrison. I think that's a much better way to do things. So, yeah, I think the Brewers are doing the right thing, taking that cutter out of the equation. But like you said, it could fit if he's able to do it and he's comfortable with it. It could be something that helps eventually. But right now, there's no reason to do it, and I don't think he needs it. He can get outs with the 3 pitches, 3.5-ish pitches that he has right now, with the sinker kind of included, because some were tagged as sinkers. Do we know if he actually threw any sinkers in this outing?
He did, I think, yeah.
Okay.
And they both said that he's going to use that to lefties, and
that makes sense.
That's okay. So that's actually the one that's interesting to me, because I didn't put this part in the story, but because he's so far behind the baseball, like, the normal 2-seam grip does not always create a whole lot of separation for guys like that off of the 4-seamer, because usually in modern baseball, when a guy throws a good sinker, it is because he's actually cutting it slightly, like we talked about. Like Aaron Ashby, Abner Uribe, those guys are all kind of within that 75 to 85 efficiency window, which means they're actually cutting the baseball slightly. They're not pronating it, or they're not staying behind it. Because when you do that, Jared Koenig, another example, when you do that with the 2-seam grip and you're cutting it just the right amount, like just the right amount of that slight cut, the seams from the spin are actually going to catch, and it's going to create this wake, kind of like, like if you have like a duck or something swimming through a body of water, like through a pond, or you're driving a boat on the lake and there's the wake behind it. That's basically what's happening with the air around the baseball. And with the right 2-seam orientation and just the right amount of cut, the ball is actually going to like drop and tail, and it's going to be a sinker. That's how guys throw sinkers now. But because Kyle Harrison is right behind the baseball, a lot of times that traditional 2-seam grip doesn't actually create a whole lot of separation. But that's what he's going with right now. He said he's on like the railroad tracks, and it's the normal. And he said that's really all he's tried. And they are kind of different. He's killing some vert on it. I think it's like 14 versus like 10, 11, I think, on average so far. But the horizontal movement is very close. He said that he might experiment with a 1-seam. Like, if this is generally like what we've done with some of our guys at the college level, like we've maybe had like 4 pronators since we've been doing this. But when we do, like, a lot of times we've put them on the 1-seam grip, because that tends to be the one that, if you're a pronator, sometimes that actually orients the ball a little bit more, where you can stay behind it, but by going on the 1-seam instead of the 2, you're actually like shifting the seams in a way where it's actually going to sink a little more.
Yep.
as a guy who's staying behind the ball. Kyle Harrison's not doing that, though. Like I said, he left open the possibility that he might try that. But again, knowing the way the Brewers seemingly don't want to actually change too much with him, I'm not expecting that. But I'm very curious to see how that sinker plays and how useful it actually is. Like the Brewers want him to keep it. And this was one where, like, I talked to some people right after the trade and said for this very reason, like, I don't think the Brewers are actually going to have him throw that more. And I think I ended up being like half right because they're going to largely limit that to lefties, like as a different look. They don't want to actually make him like a true multiple fastball, constantly mixing multiple fastballs kind of guy. But I'm also kind of wondering, is it actually different enough for him to get a lot of use out of that? And is there a change they can make there that gets him a little more separation? So that's one I'm keeping an eye on. But, like we said, larger point, like the cutter point is really the one I wanted to get out there because I do think there's just kind of this growing conception, understandably so. Like if you don't know the nitty gritty of pitch design and what it takes to actually be able to throw each kind of pitch, I think there was this growing conception out there that like the Brewers just love, like if you join the Brewers, they are going to make you throw a cutter. No, that's not how it works. They've just happened to bring in a lot of guys based on availability, guys who are capable of throwing a cutter, so they have them throw a cutter. Kyle Harrison, in his current form, is not really capable of throwing a good cutter, so they are not going to have him do that. Like their identity is not, they're not a cutter team. They're a team that is going to take whatever is available to them. They're going to bring it in. They're going to let that guy do what he does best and really try to maximize that. And that's what they're in Kyle Harrison's case. It's throw the four-seamer, throw that kick changeup, which, by the way, that was not a Brewers thing. Like they did not develop the kick changeup. He did that with Hayden Birdsong over the offseason. But they know he's good at it now, so they're going to let him use that a lot. Like they don't always change as many things as you think, or they're not changing the kind of things that I think a lot of people think they're changing.
Yeah. Yep.
A couple more notes from this game to get back on track a little bit after that rant. William Contreras hitting a 2-run home run that gave the Brewers the lead in the sixth of this one. A little bit of back and forth in this game, especially after Harrison left. Johnny DeLuca homered off of Aaron Ashby to start his second inning. That tied things up. Then they took the lead against Trevor McGill in the ninth. And the reason I'm bringing this one up is Trevor McGill is going to be interesting to watch this year just because the velo was down a little bit after he came back from the flexor strain. It has not been bad since he's been here in the regular season to start his season. It was down a little bit again in spring training. I think it has gone up a tick since the start of the regular season, but again, a lot more 97 than I don't think he's hit triple digits yet. He has hit 99 a couple times, but sitting more around 97 instead of, or it might be like 97.5 or something instead of like 99.2 or whatever he was at last year before the injury. And Trevor McGill's fastball for his slot, it's not a great shape. I don't think it's a bad shape, but it's not like a standout shape for a straight over the top guy. Like the velo was doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. And we even saw it at times last year where like even with the velo, there's not as much swing and miss as there used to be. A little bit of loud contact, and he needed to use the curveball more as the year progressed. And now he's back this year having, if things stay this way, having lost a tick on the fastball. And he did start, I want to say last year, like down a tick, and it came back as the weather warmed up. So maybe that happens, but kind of knowing the injury history adds a layer to this. The RBI double that he gave up to Nick Fortes to give the Rays what would ultimately be the game-winning run. It was a 96-mile-an-hour fastball up and away out of the zone, and Fortes got to it and doubled. To me, that's an example of like why that velo could end up mattering quite a bit. Because I think if that's 100 miles an hour, he's not getting to that. But because it was 96, and like not even a bad location, like 96 up and away, but he was hunting fastball and he got 96 and he got to it. So, does this mean that does Trevor McGill have to throw even more curveballs? Does he need to change some more things? Or does the velo come back? Maybe it does. It's still very early, but knowing like the way the past few months have looked for him, this is a story. This is something to watch. Like, how is it going to look? This was kind of a first example of like, maybe maybe it's a little different now, and maybe he needs to change something again. Too early to say for sure if that's the case, but just to kind of see some of the swings in that inning, like if it is going to look different, it is going to look like it did in this game. It is basically my point.
Yep. 100%. I mean, we talked about it at the end of last season. It was one of my concerns as we went into the playoffs is the velo going to be in that 96, 97, even 98 range for McGill? Now, obviously, those are still very hard thrown fastballs. Those are very fast fastballs. But in terms of what MLB hitters are used to seeing at this point, they're not outliers. And like you said, his fastball shape is good, but it's not great. It's not anything crazy or anything special from his very over-the-top slot. And as you also mentioned, we saw a lot of deep fly balls really the last 2 years against him. Like even going back to 2024, we saw a lot of, we were worried about it a little bit going into 2025. Like, is some of the loud contact we saw, the deep fly balls that were caught at the track, are those going to turn into homers and suddenly it becomes an issue? And obviously he was fantastic last year, but he was sitting pretty close to triple digits. Like you said, it was over 99 on average prior to his injury. So like, I think he needs to be around there because there were still quite a few deep fly balls, and you miss it, by an inch or not even an inch on the bat, but because that velo just barely blew you up a little bit, you couldn't quite get the barrel to it. It lands at the edge of the warning track instead of going over the fence, but 2 miles per hour slower, and suddenly that's a barrel, and now it's going out. So yeah, I think this is something where we saw what can happen, where a guy can catch up to a high fastball because it's not quite the same. And like you said, it might come back as the weather warms up, as he gets a little bit further into the season, maybe as he starts to really like get out of spring training mindset of, I'm still trying to stay healthy. I'm still trying to take care of my arm. And as he gets into, deeper into the season, maybe there's a little bit more of a competitiveness. That he's always a competitive dude. I'm not saying he's like taking things lightly right now, but I'm just saying as the season gets going a little bit more, maybe it just starts to come around a little bit that way too. But it is a concern, and it's exactly the reason why when there were rumors that he had quite a bit of interest around the league, I was kind of pounding the table for them to make a trade if there was one out there for good value, because I think there's a pretty decent chance that I'm pretty confident we've seen the best of McGill already. I don't think we're going to get the level he was at, but I think there's a decent chance there's a decent fall off here if that velo's not there, and it goes from a very solid closer to a guy that is more like, he's fine as a leverage guy, but he's not somebody that I feel crazy comfortable with a one run lead, because I think there's going to be some homers there if the velo's not there.
Moving on to game 2, the Brewers won by a final of 6-2. Brandon Woodruff was a story in this one. I'm sure everyone remembers there was a decision to be made about, does he begin the year with the big league club? Does he make a rehab start with Nashville after the slower buildup? Woodruff was adamant that he wanted to start here, and the Brewers trusted him, and he made good on that. A very solid outing for him. Really, really good stuff, actually. Stuff largely looked pretty similar to how it did last season. I think the ship has kind of sailed on, the velo's coming back.
Yeah.
Because that was the line last year, and I have not heard anybody say that this year now that we're a year later and the velo is not back yet. So I would guess this is probably just where he's going to live now, but he averaged 93, which is what he averaged last year. So, we talked about the velo being down in his last spring training inning. Did get down as low as the upper 80s a couple times, including on one of the home runs that he gave up. It was at 89. mile-an-hour fastball. But by and large, everything played like Brandon Woodruff stuff usually has. 5 innings for him. The 2 runs he gave up were on home runs. Struck out 6. Had 7 whiffs on the four-seam fastball out of 18 swings, 39%. So the four-seam whiffs still there, exactly like they were last year and every season before that. So, and like we've said, sitting 93, he's going to be fine. There really no concerns. The other note, a lot of fastballs in this one for him. I don't know that that's necessarily anything new, but just to see like how heavy he was on those 3 fastballs early on in the game. Also threw a couple of sweepers as well late in the game for the 2 breaking balls that he threw. So, I talked before about how he said in spring training that was a pitch that was just not something he could comfortably and consistently throw last year. It'll be interesting to see how often he uses it this year because he did more or less scrap it in game action pretty quickly last year, but never ruled out the possibility of throwing it again. So it'd be interesting to see how much we see that throughout his second season coming off of shoulder surgery.
Yeah. I mean, for me, more than anything, just seeing the velo back to where it was last year, that's really all I needed to see. Now, again, I don't think it's a coincidence that the 2 homers were against an 89 and a 90 mile per hour fastball. That is the risk. That's why it's very important that he has the velocity back into that 92, 93 range. I think, and Woodruff even talked about it after the game. He was like, I didn't really care about the velo, but I noticed it on both homers and realized like, okay, yeah, I throw the ball 89 or 90 pretty much down the middle. Like that's going to be a problem for me. But yeah, I mean, super heavy on the fastball usage, like you said. And I don't think that, like you said, it's really any different than what we used to see. Now there's the addition of the cutter. But it looked like the version of Woodruff that was very successful last year, and that's really all I needed to see, especially since he's still somewhat in the build-up process, I think, and it sounded like he was going to go out for the 6th until the Brewers had a pretty long 5th inning. So I think they were prepared for him to go out and throw another 20 or so pitches, which what did he end up with, 67 pitches in this one? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, 5 innings with that many pitches, that's kind of the type of just clean work you get from Woodruff. We talked about that when he came back. It was nice to just see how efficient he is compared to some of the other pitchers we were watching on the Brewers last year. And again, even in his first start with questions whether he'd be ready for the season, he still was quite efficient to get through 5 innings and would have pretty easily been able to go out for a 6th had they not had that very long 5th inning.
That long 5th inning saw the Brewers come back from down 2-0. Gary Sanchez drawing a walk, Lockridge singling, Joey Ortiz drawing a walk that set up a 2-run Bryce Terang single. There was a rundown. Ball was dropped. Again, we talked about the Rays playing kind of sloppy defense, so that allowed the Brewers to score a 3rd run. Ortiz was able to score because that play was not completed. So Brewers taking advantage of mistakes that would kind of be a theme throughout this series. Gary Sanchez adding a little bit of insurance, Jake Bauers as well. Both of those guys hitting home runs later in the ball game, and the Brewers taking home a pretty comfortable win when all was said and done. Game 3 was an 8-2 Brewers victory, and this is really the one where the Rays did a lot to kind of hand the Brewers a win in this one. Of the 8 runs the Brewers scored, 4 of them were unearned. Junior Caminero had himself a very rough day at both infield corners. Made a couple of misplays at third base, some rough throws, moved over to first, dropped a baseball at first base. Not a great day for him, and the Brewers making the Rays pay for that. Jacob Mizorowski making his second start of the year. A very strong outing for him. Got through 6 innings in this game. 6 innings, 2 runs allowed, scattered 4 hits, a couple of walks, and 7 Ks. Looked really, really strong in the early going. Hit a little bit of a speed bump after a delay. CB Buckner getting hit by a foul tip on a 100-mile-an-hour Mizorowski fastball. He had to come out of the game. That was scary.
Yeah.
As someone who's in the ballpark when that happened, like the sound of that baseball hitting his face mask echoed throughout the ballpark, which is not that usually does not happen. That was a direct hit.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy loud even on the broadcast. Normally, you don't you don't hear it on the broadcast other than like a slight it sounds like a glancing blow even when it gets him good. Now, he wears like that true hockey style mask, so that does have less give to it. It I sometimes wonder if that's actually even better or more protective for them when they get hit like that because the other ones have a little more give to them, but that thing just like wore it, but it just shook him. I mean, you could tell by William Contreras' reaction immediately, like trying to make sure he was fine, almost trying to catch him if he was going to fall because it looked like he was about to. Yeah, definitely a really scary moment for Buckner. That was one of the worst ones I've seen, and like you said, even the sound of it was I don't remember hearing a ball sound that loud off of an umpire at any point. So hopefully he's okay. But yeah, it's ironic. I'm not going to say funny because it's not funny, but it's ironic that we were actually just having that conversation with some of our players on Monday because one of the umpires in our game had a situation like that, and they were asking, how does that work in an MLB game if we lose an umpire? And we were talking about going to a 3-man crew, and it took only a couple of days before we got a real life example to show it to them. So actually had a couple come up to me at practice and be like, hey, we got to see it right away how it works. I was like, yeah, that's how it works.
But yeah, Smizerowski would settle back in after that, though, and like I said, get through 6. We talked about Chad Patrick getting the early hook. It was also interesting on the other side then to see, especially Mizerowski getting that 6th inning and getting
Mhm.
up to 94 pitches, kind of the opposite side of the coin there, where it seemed like an opportunity where they wanted to let him ride longer and they wanted him to, figure something out, dig a little deeper, prove something there by going out for that 6th inning.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a test of some sort, and he answered it well. I mean, he did really well with it. I think it's one of those things that if he's going to be the type of starter that the Brewers believe he can be, that pretty much anyone who has seen him pitch probably believes he can be, he's going to have to be able to do that in outings where this was a really solid, strong outing, but this was not his A stuff, especially after that delay. It looked like his A stuff early. I mean, he was those first 5 batters or so, it looked about as good as we've seen him at any point. But after that delay, it definitely the stuff had ticked down a little bit velo wise. The command definitely went a little haywire after, like shortly after, for the first few batters after. Um, but to see him kind of battle through all of that and still be able to go out in the 6th in at that time a very close game and still get the job done and get through 6 with the pitch count getting up towards 100, like that's a huge step. That's a type of step that I remember seeing with guys like Woodruff and Burns and Peralta when they were in their early stages of their career, where it was like, okay, you see them start to be able to figure that stuff out, and it's like that's that next step. That's where you start to see how they can really start to reach their ceiling. So yeah, I hope they continue to not push it in an unhealthy or dangerous way for his arm, obviously, but I hope they continue to push him in a way that challenges him to keep growing, because if he's truly going to be the ace at some point, he's going to have to be able to do that type of stuff and go out there and get outs with, his B or C stuff in the 3rd time through the order. And granted, his B or C stuff is still very, very good stuff. But I do like that they challenged him. And again, to take it back to Patrick, I hope he gets the opportunity to do stuff like that, because I think every starting pitcher needs to get that chance to kind of grow and get through those types of things and get that opportunity.
Let's run through the 8th inning outburst / implosion by the Rays that allowed the Brewers to really run away with this one and take the series. So Joey Ortiz getting on base with a single, Bryce Terang bunting, and that's when Junior Caminero dropped the throw at first base, allowing Terang to reach. William Contreras singled, bases are loaded. Christian Yelich hits a 110-mile-an-hour ground ball into right, 2-run single. Jake Bauers walks, bases are loaded again. Garrett Mitchell doubling down the right field line. It's been a rough start to the year for Garrett Mitchell. We talked about how things look, frankly, really bad in spring training, and they were not looking very good in his regular season action so far either. In fact, they largely haven't looked very good in his regular season action so far. Yet here we are. Garrett Mitchell has a 38% strikeout rate, but a 571 BABIP and a 132 WRC plus 5 games into the year.
We are back, baby.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
it's a small sample, but still kind of funny to see that kind of Garrett Mitchell's entire thing so far in his career has been, you can see what the strengths are, but the weaknesses are a big deal. But there's just been a very strange combination of batted ball luck and sequencing that has probably allowed the strengths to play a little better than they probably will over the weaknesses. And already 5 games into the year, when he has largely looked very poor on the process side, somehow there's this stuff going on where the results have been good.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about Mitchell so many times on this show, so we don't need to go super in depth, but I mean, one of the positives of hitting the ball as hard as he does and having the speed that he does is that he probably always will have a decently high BABIP. So that part isn't shocking, but it's not going to be 570 or whatever you said. That's not going to hold. But yeah, I mean, I hope he keeps getting away with it, but like, I don't, because for the Brewers' sake, it'd be awesome if it somehow keeps working out and he stays healthy and it keeps working out. But I have continued to have my doubts that it's going to over the course of a larger sample, and we'll see if we ever truly get that sample of full health, and if it somehow does continue to work out, then great. But yeah, I think at some point this year, if he stays healthy, we're going to finally see kind of the true version of Garrett Mitchell at the big league level, which I think will be a below average hitter with very good defense, a lot of speed. He's going to run into some, but I don't think the overall results are going to hold where we have seen them throughout the course of his big league career, because it just does not feel like it's even possible for that to happen.
Basically what it is he is absolutely capable of doing good things, but to this point, it's been when he does the good thing, the result has been good an unsustainably high percentage of the time when he does the good thing.
Yes.
And that's really where the disconnect is. But we'll see how the season goes for him, assuming he's able to stay on the field. To continue the sequence, though, after Mitchell's double, Blake Perkins hit an RBI ground out. David Hamilton hit an RBI single, capping off an explosive 8th inning for the Brewers, who have done a lot of their damage in the 8th inning so far this year, the first homestand of the year. DL Hall then, because of that breakout inning, was able to get the final inning. It's been a mixed bag for him as well, almost kind of like the pitcher version of Garrett Mitchell a little bit, where you can see the positives in there, but a lot of process-based things have also been very bad so far, but the results have been okay. In DL Hall's case, though, this is probably his best outing of the season of, the 3 that he's had so far this year?
Yeah.
The control has not been good, and once again, he hit the first guy that he faced, gave up a single, but kind of locked it in after that. Again, he's gone all in on the kitchen sink approach this year. The sinker is more of the primary fastball now. Changeup looked really good in this game, though. I think he was selling it really well. He killed the vert really well on a couple of them. 75% swing and miss on the changeup in this game, which helped him strike out the side. Strike out 3 in the 9th. Again, you can see the way that it can work, which is now very different than what it was supposed to be. But if he's going to stick around, especially in the role that he's been pitching so far, there need to be more strikes.
Yes. Yeah. I think he's come into every game with at least a 4-run lead, if not even a little bit higher. And all 3 outings have started with a free pass, if I'm not mistaken. So that can't happen. That's a terrible way to start an outing when you are really any time out of the bullpen, obviously. But when you have a big lead, it's got to be, I'm coming in to just attack hitters right now. I'm going to go at guys with my stuff, and I'm going to make them beat me to get back into the game rather than handing them an opportunity to get back in the game. But that has not been how he's operating. Now, obviously, he's gotten through each of the innings fine, scoreless so far this year, and actually with quite a few strikeouts. But it's not a sustainable way to start your outing to just walk or hit somebody every time out. And it does make it difficult to give him any sort of closer leverage type outing because you definitely can't afford it in those situations.
Let's go to a couple of listener questions this week. We'll start with kind of off the Trevor McGill discussion. Mason asked, should Abner Uribe be the closer? I'm still not a huge fan of your best reliever needing to be your closer. I think I understand it more than I used to just for the stability. It just seems like there's stability in the rest of the bullpen when you have one guy who's locked into that final inning. But again, I think McGill does deserve a leash, all the stuff we talked about. Again, also don't necessarily believe that you're always best off when your best guy is in the ninth inning. I don't see any reason to make a change there yet. Maybe that changes down the line, but right now it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. And there is, I think, a mental side to closing that we know Trevor McGill is very comfortable with, and he has kind of that mentality that I think plays into one of the reasons that I also have kind of grown into accepting that it probably is fine to just put a guy there and say, hey, it's your job, and mentally prepare to be in this spot pretty much every time you go out there and have this mentality of like, I'm going to shut this game down and end this thing. And like both of them have that. So if either of them is closing, you'll be fine. But I do think having the flexibility with Uribe to potentially come in and maybe get out of a jam, but also just to face like the best part of the order in the seventh or the eighth, I think there's value in that. So until McGill proves otherwise, I think it's fine for him to be the closer.
Will ask, thoughts on Murph's bullpen management so far? What do you expect to stick and what not to stick in terms of guys being used in different spots, multi-inning appearances, etc.? Outside of Aaron Ashby maybe getting one too many innings in the first homestand, I actually think he's been really good so far.
I agree.
Like with when he's pitched guys, and I actually think like, and again, I don't think you can get too fired up from like one extra inning from Ashby in week one. I'm more concerned about the fact that he was asked, is Ashby going to pitch with the frequency that he did in the second half last year? And he said yes. So we'll see how that goes down, because that would mean Aaron Ashby is going to throw like almost 100 innings out of the bullpen this year, which just does not happen. But outside of that, like I actually thought he did a very good job of balancing who was pitching on which day, the situation that they were in, use some B guys when they were, up by more than 3 or down a couple. Like I actually thought he was very good.
Yeah, I agree. Seeing Woodford in there in the White Sox game that they made the comeback in, Anderson's been used in games with a lead and also when they were trailing in that one. Like I have no complaints with how they've been using the bullpen so far, other than, again, maybe we don't need to go multi-innings with Ashby as often as we seem to be planning to, but or just as often in terms of every day that he would be pitching. But I like the DL Hall usage. It's when I would have put him into the games. Uribe and McGill have been used where I would expect and want them to be used. So yeah, it's been 2 series, but I definitely don't have many complaints with how things have been handled. And I hope, as I said earlier, like some of the trust maybe growing with some of those B guys would be really ideal so that he continues to use them this way, because I think this will be the best. If he can continue this type of trend, I think this would be the best way to get through a regular season with your best guys probably at their peak as they're hitting the playoffs is what you're hoping for, obviously.
Michael asks, how long of a leash do you give Brandon Sproat considering what is happening with Nashville? I was asked this on 1250 earlier this afternoon, and I actually pretty long, to be honest with you. Like,
agreed.
Logan Henderson is not built up down there, so it's what, Robert Gasser and Shane Drowan are probably the next 2 guys, and
yeah,
I like those guys, but I like Brandon Sproat more than both of them. So pretty long leash.
Yeah, I tweeted something after the game about how let's not judge Brandon Sproat as based off of his first outing here. Let's give him some time. And I had a lot of replies were like, yeah, that's fair, but after, like, if it's another not so great start, I'm probably making the move then. And I was like, well, I'm still not going to be at that point either. Like there's a little bit more leash now. If it becomes, if he walks the park and he's got like some sort of, just clearly the command's gone right now, and they just need to, let's send him to AAA and let him work on some things and let him get back in the right mental state or something. If that happens, then maybe I would have like a pretty quick leash on that type of situation, but I don't expect that. Um, so if he gets hit a little bit in this next start, like I'm not moving on to bring Gasser up. Like that's just not how I'm going to look at it. I think he made the opening day roster for a reason. I don't think he was the last guy in the rotation even coming into the season. Like I'm not sure he was looked at as like the fifth guy there. Now, with how Harrison pitched, obviously he's not going to be getting demoted at any point soon either, but I think he's going to get plenty of time. I think they're mostly expecting any decision point to be probably tied more to Priester, if I were guessing, or a separate injury to happen for one of those other guys to come up. But I don't think they're even looking at one of them coming up for Sproat anytime soon. Now, if they do have a stretch of games where they might need 6 starters in 6 days, could I see like a Gasser coming up for someone else and making a start in the middle there to try and get Woodruff an extra day of rest and Miz an extra day of rest? Yeah, I could see them making a move to Nashville for something like that, but I don't think it'll be for Sproat, and I don't think it should be.
HC Purdy asks, if the Brewers trade Terang with a year of control left, would that mean that they have him for 2 more? If you mean after this year, yes.
Yeah.
Also, I've been pretty impressed with Zerpa. Do you think he could become a high leverage reliever? Also, yes.
Yeah. It, as we talked about earlier with Terang, he has this year and then 3 more years of control. So if they were going to trade him prior to his last season, he would have this year, next year, and the year after, and then they would trade him that offseason. So still basically 3 full seasons of Terang. And yeah, absolutely think Zerpa can be a high leverage guy. That's what we talked about when the trade happened. I think that's something he's absolutely capable of, coming off of the WBC where he looked very solid. And then his start so far, he did have the one White Sox game where the relay we talked about was his inning. So that cut down a run, and he had given up 2 hits. He didn't strike anyone out in that inning, but just generally the stuff looks good. He's attacking the zone with it. I think he looks like somebody who can absolutely get some pretty big outs for the Brewers throughout the season.
I get mad when the Brewers throw too many sinkers, but this is the one guy I want actually throwing a ton of sinkers.
Yep.
The Ginger asks, kind of off of that point, random extension talk that probably will not amount to anything since it's a bullpen arm. But anyway, you see us adding a few years to Zerpa's deal. I get you can't trust these arms, but he's young enough and could start. You basically said it at the end of the question. It would only happen if they think he's a potential starter.
Yeah.
If they do think he's going to make that jump, I could see it happening. But if he's a bullpen arm, they're going to go to year with him and then probably either ride out how many years he's got left, or more likely what they're going to do is they're going to get the best seasons out of him and then flip him when it looks like he's on the downswing.
Yep. The same way they acquired him with a guy like Nick Mears, they'll try and do the same thing with him when they feel he's kind of reached his peak and is on the way down. So, yeah, if they think he can start and if they think they need him to start moving forward, then yeah, I could see something getting worked out where they add a couple years on, maybe try and add it kind of in the Ashby form of like, hey, we can give a decent guarantee and then some team options if we really want to keep you around. But I'd be pretty surprised. I think they view him as a pen arm at this point, and he'll be good for a couple of years, and then they'll probably flip him for somebody that they view as the new version of him.
All right. Well, the minor league sandbox is back, much to Spencer's excitement. And I would assume to the excitement of a lot of listeners who tune into this program for that reason. So I see you have a fair share of notes here. Nothing crazy compared to what you've done before, but I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, we've only got AAA to talk about right now, so I can't go too crazy with the notes. Next week, though, then we'll really be back. But we will start with a question this time around from HC Purdy, who had a draft question. He asked if I have an opinion on Ruger Rojas, I believe it is actually, from Texas, and then Cider Cannon, who transferred from Davidson to Duke. He said, I know Cannon is currently injured, but he seems very talented. So, yeah, Rojas, I mean, it is a very deep mix, very interesting mix. Pretty good changeup that takes like more than 10 miles per hour off of it with pretty good depth, gets good carry on the fastball. He's got the cutter, he's got the sinker, he's got the slider. It's probably mostly slider, I would say, on the breaking ball. I think they're classified a couple as curveballs, but I think they're more sitting in slider range. Yeah, he's probably going to be like a first, maybe probably more of a second round pick, I guess, but he's going to go early. It's somebody I could see the Brewers being interested in. I don't know that they'd want to go like above slot for someone like that. So maybe if they can get him a little bit at a discount in one of the early rounds, I could see them being interested. But he's definitely very, very talented, and he's taken a big step this year. He was somebody that was interesting in last year's draft, but returning to school seems like a pretty good call because he made a nice leap and the velo took a nice jump as well. In terms of Cannon, I don't know much about him. I looked into him a little bit. Like, he's definitely a talented dude. He's a good athlete. He can catch, but he also plays some outfield. He's mostly caught for Duke this year before his injury, and it sounds like he's going to miss most or all of the season. A talented guy who is kind of a catcher, kind of not, coming off injury with some production to go with it. Certainly sounds like Brewers type. I didn't find him on really any of the draft lists, so I don't know. He might be somebody who mid-season now starts to pop up on some of those lists, but it's a good shout because it seems like somebody who the Brewers would be interested in, just given all of the context surrounding him. Transferring from a smaller school, really good start, really good athlete, can catch, and then the injury where he might not be as well known. That's the type of thing. It's not exactly the same, but it's not also that dissimilar from like Marco Dingus a couple of drafts ago. So I could see them being very interested in him for sure. But yeah, to move into some of the performances from the AAA side of things, that's all we have right now. The Timber Rattlers were supposed to have their opening day today, but it was postponed due to weather. So still only AAA games to this point. Friday, when most of you are listening, or at least when this comes out, that will be the opening day for the rest of the affiliates. So we will have the Warbirds, the new Wilson Warbirds, having their first game as after the rebrand. And then you'll have the Shuckers and the Timber Rattlers all playing on Friday. I believe the T-Rats now have a doubleheader because of the postponement. So we will see how those go. But for now, focusing on AAA, we talked about Robert Gasser. He had a fantastic first start of the season. He went 5 2/3 shutout. He only allowed 2 hits. He walked 3 and he struck out 11. Just looked really good. We talked about him on the podcast last episode about how we believe the new sinker could be really good for him, but we didn't want it to become such a big focus that he was not able to generate the swing and miss and get the strikeouts that we know he's very capable of. And in the first AAA outing of the season, he showed a really good mix of being able to get those ground balls with the sinker, but also when he gets ahead, when he has the chance to go for the strikeout, be able to do that. Side note, we talked about K-Row coming up for, the couple of games. He called an incredible game. I was so pumped up watching him call this game. I love the sequences he was working with Gasser. Like, it's one of those things where if things do work out for K-Row, I think that's going to be one of my favorite parts of him being in the big leagues is watching him kind of manage a game and work his way through calling a game, because It's really good, and I hope the Brewers don't try and take some of that away from him by focusing on the fastball stuff, because he mixes pitches really well and works with his pitchers extremely well too. So Logan Henderson, again, we talked about him as well as another candidate who, once he's built up, could be an option for the Brewers rotation. But for now, he's coming out of the bullpen, building up that direction or in that way. He threw 3 shutout innings the other night, only 1 hit, only 1 walk. He struck out 5. The fastball was getting up to 20 inches of induced vertical break, got a ton of whiffs against it. He looked very good. He threw a couple more breaking balls. They fit more into the slider shape that we kind of thought we were going to see from him, rather than like the true curveball that he threw on his first one in spring. But a good slider, like a legitimately playable, solid slider, and a pitch that, again, gives him that weapon that can go the other way. He threw a ton of cutters, actually more cutters than changeups in this one, and it played quite well as well. That pitch, including in spring, has been hovering much more on the glove side movement part of the chart rather than on the arm side movement. So that's really been good to see too. So he's taking a lot of the steps I was hoping to see from him to be that potential like mid-rotation starter rather than the 5 and dive 2-pitch guy that he was kind of trending towards before some of this glove side stuff started moving better. So really positive development for him there. Now we just got to get him built up, and when he's ready, hopefully we'll see him in Milwaukee at some point. But another starting candidate at some point this year could be Coleman Crow. His first start, he went 4 2/3. He gave up 6 hits. I believe all were singles, maybe 1 extra base hit. He walked 2, but he only gave up 2 earned runs. He struck out 6. Baseball America actually wrote him up as like a data darling from this one because of how good the breaking balls looked. The fastballs all kind of sitting in that, they're interesting, but none of them have like an outstanding shape, kind of what we talked about earlier with a guy who supinates like him. He throws the sinker, he throws the four seam, he throws the cutter, and he can use them all to kind of play off of each other to help them play up above what the pure stuff would say. Will Childers is a guy that I was very interested in when I watched him in Biloxi. The data we got when he got to AAA last year did not look very good in terms of the movement. The shapes were very inconsistent. His first couple outings in AAA this year have looked much better. The fastball's getting decent enough carry on it. It's nothing special, but it gets decent carry, and there's a lot of separation from the rest of his pitches. He's always been a really heavy breaking ball guy. I think we're talking about a slider and a curveball here that have sharp movement, mostly just vertical movement. It's not a ton of side to side, but it's late breaking. He throws the slider around 90. He throws the curveball in like the mid 80s. And then the biggest thing that stood out for him so far is the addition of a changeup that he didn't have at all previously. And now it's a good pitch. It's a pitch that grades out above average. He used it a bunch of times against lefties so far this year. It's moving well. It's got good. He's gotten down to like 0 induced vertical break on one of them. It's a really big addition to the profile. It was a guy who struggled with lefties in the past because it was all fastball and breaking ball. This gives him a weapon against them. It could be a really big difference maker for him. So he was a guy that was interesting in Biloxi. Didn't love what I saw last year when he got to AAA. He really limited walks in spring in his outings, and he hasn't walked anyone so far in AAA this year, I believe. Yeah, he hasn't walked anyone in his couple innings so far. So if he can keep the command in a good spot with the new changeup and the breaking balls in a more consistent shape than what we saw last year, he's a guy who could be a big league reliever, I think. So good to see from him. And then the last pitcher we'll talk about is Brian Fitzpatrick. Mentioned him a few times last year. Big, tall lefty, 6'7". Not a super low slot, but not a very high one either. He sits in like the 35 to 37 degree arm angle from kind of outing to outing. But it's a big, there's a wide variety in the pitch mix. He's got a slider that he throws quite a bit. He's got the 3. Well, he's not really mixing the cutter right now, although The ones that are marked as sliders, you could probably argue are more in the cutter range. I'm just trying to see the spin if it's on here. Either way, it's kind of the four seam, the sinker, cutter-ish, slider-ish type pitch. He's got the bigger sweeper, and then he's got a pretty good changeup that was getting up to 20 inches of run on it at times in spring, and pretty close to it on a couple so far this year. So it's kind of a crossfire delivery from the left side. He's got pitches that can work against lefties, pitches that can work against righties. He went from sitting in the low 90s in 2024 to more in the mid 90s last year. He's been averaging 94 on it this year on both of his fastballs. So interesting arm that I think could be an MLB option at some point in the near future. It'll be interesting to see where he goes this year because he was Rule 5 eligible. They didn't protect him this year. I have a feeling if he does not make it up to the big leagues at some point this year, they would probably have to protect him to keep him in the org. He seems like someone who would get drafted next year if they don't, just based on the type of stuff, the lefty look, the size, everything else that he brings. And he actually has some starting experience in the minors as well. So, yeah, good start for him and an interesting one to watch. And then on the offensive side, not a ton of excitement so far. Tyler Black had a homer. I don't believe he played today, but coming into today, he had an 812 OPS, pretty heavy whiff. To me, and someone mentioned this to me as well, like it looks like he's kind of selling out for fastballs right now, which he had struggled with in the past. But he also, including in spring, was kind of chasing breaking balls and off speed more often than we had seen in the past. Makes me wonder if he's kind of changed the approach to go after the fastball. It might be working right now. We'll have to see if pitchers can adjust and maybe stop throwing as many fastballs, because I think the book was out on him to attack him with some velo. Now, he made an adjustment. Will they adjust back? But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. I think the most exciting development so far has been Luis Lara, though. He already has 2 homers on the season. He hit 3 all of last year in Biloxi. Though watching a lot of games and just kind of seeing how he was hitting the ball, lefties had a tough time in Biloxi sometimes because of the wind coming off of the ocean out there. I think he probably had enough to hit like double-digit homers, and there were some like 107 mile per hour fly balls that looked like they were hit at good launch angles that didn't go out. So I think he was showing a little bit more power than the numbers would have said, but still 2 homers already, only 3 all of last year in a healthy season where he was pretty much playing every day. And then through tonight's game, he has 19 balls in play, and 13 of them have been hit 95 miles per hour or higher, which is kind of where you get that hard hit. That's the line for the hard hit ball. So for a guy who's maybe generously listed at 5'7", although with the ABS, maybe that's an official measurement now. But a 5'7" guy who a couple of years ago probably had like 20 power, game power, he's starting to impact the ball a little bit. Now, the high-end exit velos still aren't huge. He reached 110 in AA last year, but so far this year, I think he's maxed at about 104. But it's been consistently hard. So you'll see guys who can make it work with that type of profile, where if you can hit it hard consistently, despite not having the very, very high top-end stuff, you can make that type of profile work. So the defense is great. He really made strides as a base runner last year in terms of the instincts and the jumps he was getting on steals, and like the success rate skyrocketed in AA last year. There is so much to like here. I know the Brewers are fans of him. Pat Murphy has talked about how much he likes him. If the bat takes a jump and he's impacting the ball a little bit with even just decent power, like I've talked about Blake Perkins being pretty close to his floor already, I think that would become pretty much a shoo-in at that point if the power is there to any extent. And I've talked about how, Frelick might be the ceiling, but as a switch hitter, I still think that would probably be the case. But he's showing especially the pop from the right side, which obviously Frelick doesn't have that side. But there's a lot to like here. Like, he's a borderline top 100 guy if he's impacting the ball decently and like at a decently high level consistently, because of the defense and the base running and everything else that he brings, and really good bat to ball, and he makes good swing decisions. if there's some pop there, yeah, he looks like a guy who could be your center fielder, honestly, sooner rather than later without really surprising me all that much. And he's only 21 years old still. There's been a lot to like so far in the early season for him. We'll see how it goes as the season continues, but that is one of the biggest questions for him. And to see him kind of answering it right off the bat is really encouraging. So we will see, but I really would not be surprised if Luis Lara is pitching in the big league, or playing the outfield in the big leagues at some point for the Brewers this year, because he's kind of answering some of the bigger questions that he had. But yeah, that's our first minor league sandbox. We'll be back next week with a lot more. I won't talk as much about everything. I'm lying. I probably will, but we'll have a lot more to cover because there will be a lot more games to talk about at that point.
Well, you said it. We'll be back next week. We'll have minor league and, believe it or not, MLB coverage of the Brewers. But we're back in full swing now. This is a longer one.
Oh, yeah.
If you made it this far and you want to do this again, you can check out the next episode coming out next Friday. Until then, thank you as always for listening.